Been good for tonight. So good to see you this evening. Pray that God's blessed you. Pray that you're glad you're joining us tonight on YouTube. Pray that God's blessed you today. Take your Bibles, please, tonight and turn to Psalm 102. Psalms 102. We're just going to be looking at the first 11 verses. And just to give you kind of what's going on here in this chapter, if you notice what it says, a prayer of the afflicted, when he is overwhelmed and poureth out his complaint before the Lord. I believe that we as believers are very neglectful of many different things, but I think one of the biggest things that we are neglectful of is prayer. That's something that we don't seem to find the time to do unless something bad happens, or unless we're in some kind of trouble, or unless something difficult is coming up. Then we want to cry out to God and go, God, help me, God, help me. Problem is, we should be going to God daily. And I'm not talking about before a meal. We definitely should bless Him for ask a blessing for our food, but at the same time, we should be going to God daily just to speak to Him. You see, when a big event does happen, we tend to go to God, but the problem is He hasn't heard from us in a very long time, but we still expect Him to listen to us and do what we ask Him to do. Folks, God is not a genie in the bottle. God is not an ATM machine that we just go in and punch in our 4-digit code and something comes out. God is not that way. There are times, though, when we go to God that He is merciful. He is gracious to us. He answers our prayer as we cried out to Him. There are also times that He doesn't answer our prayers the way that we want it. Does that mean that God is bad? Of course not. That just means that that was not God's will for that to take place. There are times that God's had to tell me no. There's times that God's told me yes. Every answer that God gives, though, is correct. And just because it is according to His will, it is correct. How many of you ever prayed for God to do something by a certain time? I have. God, this bill's due. And I got to have X amount of money at this time. And that date goes by. And no money. Does that mean that God failed me? Of course not. Of course not. God had other ways of taking care of that. His time is not always our time, is it? You see, we can see right here from the beginning of this psalm, in Psalm 102, that the penman is afflicted and overwhelmed and comes to God to pour out his heart and his soul to the only one who can help him, who can answer his prayer and can soothe his troubled mind and heart. And the penman writes down this cry, because that's what he says. The first thing, hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come unto thee. First thing he tells him, Lord, I need you to hear me. Hear my cry. What we need to understand, though, is this penman is not crying out to God because of some great sin that he has committed. This isn't him crying out to God because he has done something wrong and God is penalizing him for it. This is someone coming to God because he is afflicted and overwhelmed by some great burden. Have you ever had a burden that you've had to cry out to God for? You just weren't sure. What do I do, God? There's this burden that's on my shoulders that I just don't know what to do. Well, this is what the penman's doing. He's crying out. He's afflicted. He's in pain. Crying out to God is not always something we have to do because of sinful things. Maybe there's someone in your life that's not saved today and you cried out for them. I have. I did this morning. I cried out to God for those individuals. Maybe there's a health issue that you have or somebody close to you has, and it's a burden upon you. Guess what? You can cry out to God for that. Maybe it's financial. And there's a burden resting upon you. Whatever that burden is, you can cast that upon the Lord, and He will be the burden bearer for you. And this is what we see here. So for whatever the reason, the psalmist is crying out to God for Him to hear him and for Him to help him. So I believe this chapter is divided into two separate parts. We're just going to look at the first part tonight because we just don't have time to do all 28 verses. So we're going to do just the first 11 verses tonight, and next Sunday night we'll hopefully be able to finish up all the rest. But I want us to read the first 11 verses, and we're going to look at the title of my message is Hear My Cry. So let's read those first 11 verses. It says, Hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come unto thee. Hide not thy face from me in the day when I am in trouble. Incline thine ear unto me in the day when I call. Answer me speedily. For my days are consumed like smoke, and my bones are burned as an hearth. My heart is smitten and withered like grass, so that I forget to eat my bread. By reason of the voice of my groaning, my bones cleave to my skin. I am like a pelican of the wilderness. I am like an owl of the desert. I watch and am as a sparrow alone upon the housetop. Mine enemies reproach me all the day, and they that are mad against me are sworn against me. For I have eaten ashes like bread, and mingled my drink with weeping, because of thine indignation and thy wrath. For thou hast lifted me up and cast me down. My days are like a shadow that declineth, and I am withered like grass. I just have one point tonight. That point is the great affliction. This is what this penman, which I believe is David, is writing here. He is afflicted here. We see right from the beginning, though, who he's going to with his problems. It says, Hear my prayer. Who? O Lord, O Jehovah. He doesn't go to his neighbor. He doesn't go to his mom or his dad or his brother or his sister or even his priest. He is going directly to God and crying to God and saying, God, only you can help me. Hear my prayer. And you know what you understand? It's his prayer and not someone else's. John Gill said this, and I want you to listen because I think it's very, it pretty much personifies what is being said here. He says this, his own and not another's. Not what was composed for him, but composed by him, which came out of his own heart and out of unfeigned lips, and expressed under a feeling sense of his own wants and troubles. And though dictated and inwrought in his heart by the Spirit of God, yet being put up by him in faith and fervency, it is called his own, and which he desires might be heard. I think of it this way. What he's trying to say here is this. God, nobody put me up to this prayer. I'm not praying for Woody right now. I'm praying for me. I'm not praying for Mary Lee right now. I'm praying for me. God, I'm all for intercessory prayer. Please don't get me wrong here. But when you have a burden, you are the one crying out for it. It must be yours. That's why he's saying, hear my prayer. God, I'm not coming to you right now for Woody. I'll do that later, but right now I have a burden. I've got to get this off of my heart. I've got to get this off of my shoulders. I've got to come to you. Hear my prayer. And folks, there's nothing selfish about that. Please understand, I don't think I can't pray for myself because that's being selfish. If you can't pray for yourself, then don't ask others to pray for you. This is what gets me, and there's been people that I've heard do this. They will ask, will you please pray for such and such? Are you praying for them? No. Then why in the world do you want me? You better be praying for them. If it's your burden, if it's your prayer, if it's your problem, you need to be praying for it. Don't bring it to somebody else's attention if you haven't brought it to God's attention first. And this is what he's saying here. Hear my prayer, Lord, and let my cry come unto thee. You know, many times, words just cannot express what we're going through. There's such a hard time in our life that we're going through this affliction and this burden that we're overwhelmed that all we can do is cry. Richard Baker said this, the greatest bell in all the ring of prayer is the cry. Moms, let your child cry out. Now, I'm not talking about saying, Mommy. You may go, what? But when you hear your cry go, Mom, you're going to move, aren't you? You're going to listen. You're going to be like, what's going on? What happened? What's the problem? When they cry out, that's what he's saying here. And let my cry come unto thee. Lord, listen to me. Moms are going to listen to their child when they hear them crying out because there's some urgency there. Lord, hear my cry. It's urgent. And you may say, how do you know it's urgent? Well, look at verse 2. See, during these times, many times of hurt and affliction, we may feel that God is hidden from us, don't we? But look what verse 2 says. He says, hide not thy face from me in the day when I am in trouble. So many times we can kind of feel like we're all alone, and we feel like God has turned his back on us, or God has hidden his face from us, and God is not listening to us. Folks, God has not done any of those things. We're just looking at it through the wrong lenses. We're looking at it through the lenses of hurt and affliction. And we're not looking at it in terms of what God has never left us. He'll never leave us or forsake us. He's right there. He's going to hear our cry, but many times we feel like his presence is not there and we need it. He says here, incline thine ear unto me. Spurgeon said, bow thy greatness to my weakness. This young man, David, he was in trouble. He was having afflictions. He was overwhelmed. And he said, Lord, bow thine ear to my weakness, the great ear of God. Would you bow it down to hear what I'm going to say? If sin is within me and you cannot look upon me, then at least give me your ear. Hear what I have to say. He needs God to answer him speedily. It says, in the day when I call, answer me speedily. You know, that's kind of how we want God to do, isn't it? As soon as we say God, we want him to go, yes. I need this. Sure. When do you need it? Now. Oh, good. Thanks, God. I need it right now. Got it. Ding dong. Oh, here it is. Does it work that way, though? Of course not. But here's the thing you understand. God already knows you have the need before you ever know you have the need. He's working out things possibly weeks and months and years ahead of time to meet that need that you never even knew you were going to have a need for. But he's waiting for it. And here we see here it says, in the day when I call, as soon as I call, you need to answer me speedily. What does that mean? It means that this is urgent. Urgent. I can't stand when I call someone and I have something urgent that I need to tell them and they don't answer the phone. Drives me crazy. And my wife is laughing because she'll do that to me sometimes. I'll try to get on the phone with her and her phone will be on vibrate. She won't hear it. And I'm like, pick up the phone. So I'll text her, I'm trying to get in touch with you. And she'll call me. What do you need? Just try to call you. This is urgent. When it seems like when you want to get with someone, you can't ever find them. And when you don't need them, they're always there. Well, this is what we're seeing here. He's saying, God, I need you to answer me now. But remember something. It's never about our timing. Just because we feel like we need something right now doesn't mean we need something right now. But I've got to have it now. No. God knows when you need it. Or you may say you don't even need it. But this person's going through, remember, affliction, suffering. He is being overwhelmed. And he's saying, God, you got to hear me now because I don't think I can take this much longer. I think of it like this. I had to have a stress test one time. And it's the kind where they put you on a treadmill. Anybody ever had those? And put you on there, and you're on there for a minute, then they said, we're going to raise it up a little. We're going to raise it up a little. We're going to raise it. And after you go each minute, they raise it up just a little bit more, a little bit more. Well, they said, when you think you can only do a minute more, tell us. And I said, why? They said, well, slow it down. I said, well, how in the world am I going to know if I can do a minute more? I may only be able to do 10 seconds more, then I'm going to die. I mean, so I remember getting on that thing, and at first it was real easy. I do this all day long. This isn't a big deal. But when it got to about here, and it's moving, yeah, you're going, stop! now. I'm dying. I mean, I'm up there running as fast as I can, and I go, minute, yeah, now. And they're going, oh, okay. They're push their little buttons, and it starts going, do, 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 do. And you feel it slowing down, and you just want to kind of let go and just slide off. Maybe you'll feel better then. Well, you're looking at that minute time, and you're going, this is urgent. Turn that thing off. Slow it down. Here he's saying, it's urgent, God. You got to hear me now. You may say, well, why was he saying all this? Look at verse 3. For my days are consumed like smoke. You know, smoke has no substance, does it? You know, it's nothing but air, and it holds no weight. And he's saying, my days, the days that are ahead of me, the days that I'm living right now, they're nothing. It's like a puff of vapor that will be here a moment and then it's going to disappear. This is the kind of pressure that he was under, the burden that he had. When we're afflicted, we may feel this way. We may feel like, wow, you know, I feel like I could just be blown away any time now. There's nothing here to me. I've just been pressed down into nothing under this burden. He says here, for my days are consumed like smoke, and my bones are burned as a hearth. And you see, if you've ever had a fireplace in your home, and we have, you get a fireplace there, and you put wood in it, start a fire, keeps you warm. Where after that fire burns down, the coals burn down, what do you have left? Ashes. What do you do with those ashes? Well, if you're smart, you scoop them out, put them in a bag or whatever, and get rid of them. So we keep them there. But what happened to the wood? What happened to the true substance that was there? It's gone. Powder. Have you ever picked up ash? You pick it up and go, just gone. That's what he's saying. My bones are burned as a hearth. In other words, what he's saying here, under this great pressure, under this great burden, my bones have been crushed almost to the point that they are like dust. They're not worth anything. I feel like I can't even stand up straight. I'm being under so much that is going on here. His body has been affected by this affliction. Can I just say this to you? When you're under a great burden, when you're overwhelmed, when there is great affliction, it does damage to you physically and mentally. A lot of people don't realize that. Some people get rid of all that. They have an outburst, or they do screaming, or whatever it is they do, and they get all of it out. Some people hold it in. But when you're under that kind of pressure, pretty soon you're going to blow, aren't you? This is what he's saying here. I feel like this has been such a burden that my bones are being crushed until there's nothing left. Because my heart is smitten. Verse 4. He's withered like grass. What this means is this. It means that this is personal. When your heart is smitten, it's not because some guy in another country, something happened to him. This is something personal that's happened. This may be a burden for a brother or a sister, a mom, a dad, a grandma, a grandpa, one of your best friends. This is a burden that you have. It's an affliction that you have. My heart is smitten and withered like grass. You know what happens when you cut grass? The grass that you cut that's laying on your yard, after it's been cut, what happens to it? It withers and dies. Why? Because the root's gone. It's been cut from the root. My heart is like this. My heart is smitten. It's withered. It's dead and withered. And this is what he's feeling like because of this great affliction that he is going through. He even says he's so bad off that I forget to eat my bread. Have you ever been so burdened that you didn't eat? Sometimes with fasting and prayer, that's what we're supposed to fast. Here he's saying, I forgot to eat my bread. It came time for breakfast and I forgot. It came time for lunch and I forgot. It came time for dinner and I just forgot. Why? Because this was on his mind more than anything else. Folks, when there's a true burden that you have, it's always going to be here and it's always going to be here until you give it to him. And it's going to weigh you down. And that's what he's saying here. Hey, it says, my heart is smitten and I'm withered like grass so that I forgot to eat my bread. It says, by reason of the voice of my groaning, my bones cleave to my skin. His sorrow has become so bad that he's become emaciated. Almost like a living skeleton. You see what he said before that? That I forget to eat my bread? What happens when you quit eating? You start losing weight, right? To the point that you can become emaciated, you become anorexic. This is what he's saying. This has been such a burden upon me that I don't even want to eat. Now, understand, we can feel this way too. You can feel this way. You can feel like this burden is so great that's always on my mind that I don't want food. I don't want company. I don't want to be around others. I want to be alone. We're going to look at that in just a moment, that this is what David is saying pretty much, that the problem is we need to be around others. We need to be around God's people. We may be weak and weary, but you know what we can still do? We can still cry to God. We can still give that burden to him. See, you have to remember, think about this. He says, by reason of the voice of my groaning, my bones cleave to my skin. Remember, this is nothing that he has done in terms of sin. None of the things that he's talking about here is done because of a sin that he has committed. It's because he has a burden. He's crying out to God. Then he begins to talk about in verse 6, which I think is interesting. He says, I am like a pelican of the wilderness. I'm like an owl of the desert. You think a pelican and an owl, what in the world is that? Well, if you look at a pelican doesn't always look like a happy bird, does it? In case you don't know what a pelican is, that big bird with the big mouth, and it's got a big beak, and you see it swallowing fish whole, and it just doesn't look like a very happy bird. A lot of times it's by himself. It's talking about being alone. The owl is the same thing. In biblical times in Palestine, there was a owl I've looked up and was talking about, that they say was a very grotesque and comical looking owl. And the owl was pretty much always by itself, always on a perch somewhere, unless somebody came by to bother it or it saw food. They were alone. Nobody wanted to be around them. This is what he's saying. I'm all alone. Nobody else can feel the way that I feel. You know, when you have someone close to you die, you feel like nobody else can feel like this way. When you hear the news that something is wrong with you physically, and there's that great burden, or maybe a family member, somebody close to you has this great, nobody can feel like the way that I feel right now, this great burden. That's exactly what Elijah said, didn't he? I'm the only one that's standing for you, and God had to say, no, there's quite a few more. Elijah, you just having your little pity party. And Elijah was. He was having his pity party, saying, nobody else is going to serve you, God. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. But in his mind, he felt like he was all alone. Folks, can I tell you something? You're never alone. God says, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Because if you look in verse 7, he even talks about like this. I watch in him as a sparrow. What? Alone upon the housetop. Now, here's this lone sparrow on the housetop. He's watching and keeping watch. I'm the only one, he's trying to say, that's being afflicted. I'm the only one that's watching out. I'm the only one that's looking out for these burdens. I'm all alone. And folks, this is how you feel when you're afflicted, don't you? And there's that burden. Even if your spouse is there with you, that spouse may not understand the burden that you have the way that you do. Can I tell you something, folks? Every one of us that have children should have a burden for our children. Grandchildren. You got great-grandchildren, so on. You should have a burden for your spouse. Burden for your mom, for your dad. You may say, why should I have a burden for them? Because you want to see them, if they're not saved, saved. That should be a burden. I have a burden for my family. I want to see every one of them come to Christ. I have a burden. See, my burden's going to be a little different than what my wife may have a burden. Does she love my family? Yes. Probably not like I do. I'm going to have that burden. But I'm not alone in that burden. You know why? Because I can share it with my wife. She can pray also. I can share it with the church. All the people that are here, you can pray for them too. But it's going to be different for me. But I don't feel alone. Because I can give that to God. And God takes it. And God's going to do with it as He wants to. But notice that He uses this word as a sparrow. A sparrow is normally a very cheerful, singing bird. But not this one. See, this sparrow is much happier when there'd be other sparrows around. But it says here, I'm like, I watch and am as a sparrow alone upon the housetop. Sparrows are not a solitary bird, but the penman here once again feels alone. If you want to be alone, it's not hard. You can become a hermit. You can stay in your house. You can never answer the phone. You can even have your groceries delivered. You can have your pharmaceutical items delivered. You can have everything delivered so you never have to leave. You can do that. A lot of people are doing that right now. I'm not sure why, but they are. But you don't have to be alone. That's why you need to come into God's house, to be with God's people, so that you can be with them, so that they can share that burden. They can pray for that burden. They can come along beside you, and you don't have to be alone. Here he is saying the whole time, I feel alone. He even comes here, if you look at verse 8, my enemies reproach me all the day. And they that are mad against me are sworn against me. You know, enemies here are relentless. All they want to do is destroy you. And that's what he's saying here. My enemies reproach me all the day. They'll never give up. They're never going to stop. They would taunt him and insult him. They would question about where your God is at. What's he doing for you? Oh, you got this burden? That's tough. Making him feel even worse. You know, pouring a little salt in that open wound. But what do you expect from an enemy? You expect that. And this is what he's trying to say. But who is he crying to? He's crying to God. God, my enemies now. God, you got to take care of these guys. It's getting bad. He says, I have eaten ashes like bread and mingled my drink with weeping. You know, it's so bad that during biblical times, they would take ashes, sackcloth and ashes, and they would put sackcloth upon their head. And what he's saying here is, I've eaten ashes, as it says here. I've eaten ashes like bread. He has done this so often. He's been in sackcloth and ashes for so long that when he does pick up bread to eat it, the ashes from off of his head is falling into his bread and he's eating it. He goes to take a drink, and he's crying so many tears that the saltiness of the tears are falling down into his cup, and he's tasting it as he's drinking. It's mingled with it. This shows just how burdened he is. Let me ask y'all a question. When was the last time that burden that you have has been so great that you've cried unto God in tears? You shed tears. Most of the time we just cry out to God and go, oh, help me, God. was the last time we actually shed tears for the burdens that we have, possibly for lost loved ones? Here, I've eaten ashes like bread and mingled my drink with weeping. Because of thine indignation and thy wrath, for thou hast lifted me up and casted me down. You know what he feels like? He says, God, it's almost as if you are throwing me around. Think about it. If you've ever watched college or high school wrestling, they're trying to pin each other, the Greco-Roman wrestling. They're trying to pin each other, and sometimes they'll pick each other up and slam each other down. I don't know about you, but that does not feel good. I had an older brother who used to love to do things like that to me. It does not feel good. When you're getting picked up in the air and tossed around, you feel helpless. I can do nothing about that. Here he's saying he felt helpless. Lord, I feel like it's because of you that I am helpless, because he says, because of thine indignation and thy wrath, for thou hast lifted me up and cast me down. He even feels so bad that he says, this might be my last day upon the earth in verse 11. My days are like a shadow that declineth. The days are shortening. I won't be here much longer, God, because of this burden. And that's what he's trying to get to God. He's trying to get God's attention by going, God, I don't think I'm going to last much longer. I'm not going to be here much longer. Help me. That's what he's saying. I am withered like grass. Folks, what we need to look at and see here, this is just the first part of the chapter. But I believe it truly shows many of us and our emotions and problems and burdens that we are going through. And the problem is we need to be crying unto God to take those burdens away. You may feel just like David here. You may feel like you can't eat. You can't sleep. You feel like you're all alone. You feel like this burden's so heavy that it's crushing you. Doesn't have to. We don't have to go through that. What he's saying here is this. The rest of the chapter, he goes on to say here, verse 12, I love. He says, but. You know what that word means? It means there's a change of thought coming. I feel this way, God, and I'm going through these things, God, and all these bad things are happening, but. Look what it says in verse 12. But thou, O Lord, shall endure forever. You know what he's saying here? It's not all about me. Oh, I'm going through it. I'm having a hard time. I'm suffering under this. But it's not all about me. And it never should be. I understand. You're going to look at me and go, yeah, but I'm going through this. I got that. But I had all these problems. I got that. It's not all about you. It's all about him. And when all we do is sit around and complain, whine, moan, and say, oh, woe is me, that gives no glory to him. And that's the chief end of man, isn't it? To glorify God. That's why we see 11 verses, him crying out to God, but then he says, oh God, you're going to endure forever. You're going to endure forever. And thy remembrance to all generations. Just remember, there's always a but, but. Yes, we're going through hard times. Yes, we go through afflictions. Yes, we go through problems. Yes, we go through things that are overwhelming. But God is still there. As it says here, he'll endure forever. And he'll be remembered for all generations. We're going to look back on some of these things that we have afflictions and are overwhelming with it. We're going to look back and go, I was really worried about that. I really got that upset about that. Because in the grand scheme of things, it may be a tiny little bump in the road, but at the time it looks like it's a great mountain. David here, he's being afflicted. He's being overwhelmed. But what does he do? He cries unto God. And God hears him. Tonight, maybe you need to cry unto God. Maybe you're going through some difficult times. You need to cry unto God. Maybe it could be something that you're looking at somebody that's spiritually. There's a spiritual problem. I need to cry unto God about it. It's a burden. Why don't you give it to him tonight? Maybe it's a problem with the family. Come to the altar and give it to God. Cry unto him. Financial problem. Come to God and cry unto him. A health problem. Come unto God and cry unto him. There's no reason to go through it alone. He is always there. Let's bow our heads tonight, please. Heads bowed and eyes closed, no one looking around. Maybe tonight you need to let God hear your cry. Maybe tonight you need to come to this altar and you need to let God know that you're under a great burden. You're being afflicted. I pray that tonight you'll come to this altar and do business with him. Maybe you're overwhelmed. Come to this altar and do business with God tonight. Gracious Heavenly Father, I pray tonight that thou wouldst move in hearts, direct us in what we should do this evening through the invitation. Bring unto thyself those that need to come. I pray this all in Jesus' holy and precious name. Amen. Heads bowed and eyes closed. Let's all stand together, please. No one looking around. Jason playing a song of invitation. If you need to come, won't you come?